Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As we have our final community meeting and community forum for our master planning process, Next Stop Revere. It is great to continue to see not only some familiar faces, but new faces as well. It is also great to have and to be able to work with fantastic staff and the folks at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And we are lucky this evening to be joined by Mark Drazen, who is the Executive Director of MAPC. So if where is Mark? Mark, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for your work and MAPC's work and your staff's work on behalf of the City of Revere. As many of you have heard me say before, Next Stop Revere is our comprehensive master plan that will define what we see in our city, not only in front of our eyes right now, but over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And this engagement with all of you over the past 5 months is what will provide the most valuable input for that plan. And tonight we're talking about transportation, open space, sustainability, and public health. These are 4 critically important topics that I know that many of the people in this room feel very passionately about. We're fortunate to be supported by a wealth of public transportation options in our city, and I believe it is our job to make sure that our transportation networks are connected to the job centers that are in our city, and that they connect our residents to opportunities, and that we continue to promote and advance options that mitigate congestion on our roads. In the near term, we know that the opening of the casino in Everett Encore this summer is going to have a significant impact on our roadways. And my team has been hard at work and focused on uncovering and taking advantage of every opportunity provided by the state through the Massachusetts Gaming Commission to support our community in mitigating some of these impacts. And on the topic of sustainability, if you haven't already, I'd encourage everyone to take a look at our municipal vulnerability preparedness planning efforts that are available on the city's website. Many of these recommendations around sustainability in our master plan will build on the work that we've already done. As a coastal community, we have a lot of work to do, and we have to think about the impacts of climate change and think about the actions that we need to take to mitigate some of those impacts. And so I, through this process, have been really energized about the future of our city and the investment of time and energy that you've all placed in making sure that our future is very bright. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and I look forward to a lively conversation. Thank you.
Good evening. I did just want to note that we do have Spanish interpretation services. Tenemos servicio de interpretación en español afuera, si lo necesitan. So I'm Betsy Cowen. I'm the Chief of Economic Development at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Before we get started, we do want to just thank the steering committee. So if you're here on the steering committee, if you could just stand to be recognized for your work. Thank you. So the steering committee provides guidance throughout the plan. They've been selected by the mayor and by the team to really ensure that we have a diverse number of perspectives that are providing insight onto the plan. So we thank you. They've spent many, many hours with us already analyzing the data and making sure we're really building a plan that will build your future. So I do just want to go over briefly what we're going to be doing tonight. So we'll have a brief presentation about the 4 topics that the mayor mentioned, and then really we want to hear from you all. So this is the opportunity to get feedback from you about what you think the goals of the city should be in the 4 areas: open space and recreation, energy and climate, public health, and transportation. So we'll transition to the breakout sessions shortly, but we want to hear from you. I did just want to note that we're with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, as the mayor mentioned. We're a regional planning agency that serves 101 municipalities throughout the region, and our role is to help municipalities think about their future and plan for their residents. So some of you came to the kickoff in January, and some of you also joined us in the forum that we had on April 10th. But I did just want to remind everyone what a master plan is for those who haven't participated in those events. So master plan really is a strategic plan for the city to prepare the city for its future physical and economic development. And it shapes key decisions around capital improvements, zoning, and other land use decisions, as well as city programming decisions. And at the end of the plan, we'll also be working on an action plan for the city so that this isn't just a document that sits on the shelf, but it's something that the city can quickly take action on in the future. So the process is about a year. We had a kickoff in January, and many of you were there. We had 225 people there, and we're thrilled to see the turnout and the interest in this plan. We're now in the spring. We had one forum on April 10th where we talked about housing, economic development, and historic and cultural resources. We're now at the second of those 2 community forums, and then over the summer we'll have more opportunity for community input. So tonight is certainly a big opportunity to provide input, but it won't be the last time. And that's where we want to remind folks that there will be surveys and focus groups and other ways to get additional feedback. We'll be writing the plan during the summer and fall. We'll be finalizing it with the steering committee and with the city in the fall. And then our goal is to present it to the planning board early next year in the winter. So briefly, the goal of this presentation, first I'll talk a little bit about some of the feedback that we heard from the April 10th forum, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues to talk about key data points for each of the 4 topic areas that we'll talk about tonight. So first, one of the things that the steering committee and the city have really requested that we do is to provide all of the feedback that we have heard from you back to you so that you understand what your fellow neighbors and employees and coworkers are saying about what they want to see in the city. So I'll give a brief recap of the forum and what we heard from everyone. We had over 140 participants, and over 20 people used Spanish interpretation services. We also have all of our materials translated into multiple languages because we know this is a multilingual city, and we want to ensure that everyone can equally participate. We also offered free childcare, which we know sometimes not having childcare is a barrier to come to events, so we're really grateful that there is free childcare available tonight as well. It'll be in the gym, so you'll hear lots of noise. I'm right now going to go through the different topic areas that we heard and how people participated in that event. So the event was in the Revere High School, and we know that the high school is certainly a key element of the city and something that the city is certainly interested in building in the future. And I know there's lots of conversation about the need for a new high school, so that was something that came up that night. And we're grateful particularly for the school committee and for the Revere Public Schools and for the staff of the Hill School for allowing us to be here tonight. So we broke up into 3 different groups to talk about housing, economic development, and historic and cultural resources. And really the purpose of the forum was to talk about what the goals are for each of those areas. It's easy to start getting into details of the programs, but what we really wanted to focus on are what are your key priorities for the city? Where do you think the city should go in terms of priorities around housing, economic development, and historic and cultural resources? And then our team gathered lots and lots and lots of feedback. So thank you to everyone who wrote things down, who told us their thoughts. We gathered that all, and I'll present it to you now. So one of the groups talked about housing, and certainly there, as you'll see, there was a lot of interest in housing, and particularly what goals the city should pursue in that area. And you'll see that these were really the highest goals that rose to the top when people started talking about what goals they had for the city in the area of housing. So promoting access to home ownership, protecting tenants, and then there was lots of conversation about affordable housing that night, both preserving existing public and private affordable housing, as well as creating new deed-restricted affordable housing, and then also encouraging what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, which is encouraging many types of housing so that there's different price points for different people. We also had a discussion about economic development. And you'll see at each of these discussion groups, and it'll happen tonight, we had city staff as well as members of the steering committee who were able to provide key insight about the key points that they have based on their expertise. And these were really the main things that rose to the top in the conversation as well. First, certainly there's lots of interest in supporting small businesses in the city. And also, based on recent events, such as the closure of the Necco candy factory, there's certainly lots of interest in workforce development, as the mayor mentioned, both in terms of developing programs for workforce development, but also thinking about opportunities for residents to be employed in new developments, such as new hotels. And then thinking about the access to regional jobs, because we know many residents commute out of the city for work. Finally, we had a discussion about historic and cultural resources, and there was lots of discussion at this table as well, including discussion and insight from key partner organizations in the city. And in this area, these were the items that came to the top as well in terms of the orders of priority. So certainly increasing funding for the arts and cultural events and programs, also providing spaces that many different people can access, and documenting stories of Revere's diverse communities. We know obviously that Revere has a rich history, but also there's many new immigrants that are moving to Revere, and so there's an interest in celebrating the current culture. And then finally, there was interest in arts education. So how do we build the capacity of the schools and other organizations to educate young people in the arts? So now I'm going to invite my colleague Courtney Lewis to come up, and we're going to start transitioning into the 4 topics that we'll be talking about tonight.
Good evening. My name is Courtney Lewis, and I am a regional land use planner at MAPC. I will be co-facilitating, along with my colleague Sharon, the open space and public health breakout session. So before we jump into discussing open space and recreation goals, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge a lot of the work that the city has already undertaken to help improve Revere's parks and open spaces. Last year, the city completed its 2018 Open Space and Recreation Plan. Some of you may have been a part of that planning process. But for those of you who weren't, you may be wondering, what is an Open Space and Recreation Plan, OSRP for short, and why is it important? Essentially, the OSRP is a plan that, that provides information about the community and its environmental and recreational resources. It acts as a guide for residents that allows them to map out things that they want to change and improve in their parks and open spaces over the next 7 years. And finally, it's important to complete the OSRP, because once you do, the cities and towns become eligible for grant funding from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Those funds can then be used to make improvements to existing parks and open spaces, or used to acquire new recreational land or recreational or conservation land. Sorry. So this is a map taken from the 2018 OSRP, and this shows all of Revere's open spaces and recreational facilities. It's important to note that open space varies by ownership, level of protection, as well as use. The city owns and manages a variety of open spaces and parks, totaling more than 200 acres. And the state owns more than half of the open space in Revere. This includes areas such as Revere Beach, which is managed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, or DCR. It's important to also note that any changes or improvements that the city can make is limited to city-owned parks and open spaces, but they are very proactive in establishing good working relationships with DCR as well as private landowners. So some general feedback from the kickoff meeting in January. What we heard from you all is that there's a need for an indoor recreational facility in the city. There's an overall need for more green and open spaces throughout the city. There's also a need for diverse and inclusive recreational programming, especially for youth and elders. So taking a look at some of the comments from the kickoff meeting and comparing it to some of the feedback from the 2018 OSRP, we can see that a lot of the comments are similar and they often overlapped. Again, the need for an indoor recreational facility, the need for additional open spaces, and diverse programming throughout Revere's parks. As I stated, the city is being very proactive in pursuing and improving parks and open spaces. There are several projects that were outlined in the 2018 OSRP 7-year action plan that are currently underway, and that includes work in Gibson, Curtis, and Costa Park, as well as work on the Northern Strand Community Trail connecting Harmon Park and North Revere. The Recreation Department is also preparing to launch a pilot program utilizing the Garfield School as a citywide community center. They're going to use this as an opportunity to explore resident needs and demand for specific programming throughout the city, and then they'll use that information for planning for a new state-of-the-art recreational facility in the future. The city and the Recreation Department is also actively working to expand access and affordability to programs so that they better serve Revere residents. So 3 key things to keep in mind when participating in tonight's open space and recreation exercise, which some of you have already engaged with in the first portion of the open house portion of tonight. One thing is that this activity builds on goals and objectives outlined in the 2018 OSRP. It takes all that valuable groundwork that was done and allows it to be folded into the city's overall master plan. It also helps further refine the city's vision for its parks and open spaces. One thing that we heard throughout a comment that came up quite often in the OSRP process was that there was a need for diverse and inclusive programming in Revere's parks and open spaces. And so tonight's activity not only asks what types of programs you would like to see, but also where you would like to see these things take place throughout the city. And finally, this exercise provides an opportunity to gather additional information. For those of you who weren't able to participate and give input in the OSRP process, tonight is your chance to do so. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to my colleague Sharon, and she's going to talk to you about public health. Thank you.
Hi all, as Courtney said, I am Sharon and I'm here to represent the public health section of this master plan. So, What determines community health? So a growing amount of evidence suggests that where we live, our surrounding social and physical environments and the behaviors that they enable, they have the biggest impact on our overall health. So yes, your doctor, your healthcare, and your genes, those are playing an important role, but those neighborhoods, your cities, we can't overplay how important that is to your and the community's health and well-being. So this 60% right there that's looking at social, built environment, and behavior, that's exactly where the master plan is sitting. A master plan can shape health by shaping where you live, where you play, where you work. So in a health survey earlier this year, Revere residents were asked to define a healthy community for themselves, and they defined it as one that has access to health care, safe neighborhoods, affordable housing, and effective city services. All of these are part of a master plan, and you'll already see them represented in some of the other elements that my colleagues are presenting tonight, but they're also going to be folded in to this public health element. Which is just to say that the public health element is making a connection to this built environment, this social environment, and to the people that live in the city of Revere and the health and well-being of those residents. So we also were at the kickoff meeting, surprise, surprise, and we shared a lot of information, some of which you might have seen tonight, about health outcomes and health behaviors. And we also asked you about what in your neighborhood keeps you feeling healthy and what, if anything, in your neighborhood was viewed as a threat to your health. We heard from you that the ability to get to resources that make you feel healthy, such as the beach, such as access to healthy food, such as ability to get to your job easily, this is what makes you keep on feeling strong and happy in your community. But we also heard that you had some threats, such as safety of streets, pollution, limited green space, limited water parks, and lack of indoor recreation spaces. These were all seen as community challenges. Earlier this year, there was a health survey sent out, as I mentioned before, on which Revere residents identified their top 5 health concerns. The initial findings from the Revere survey show these in order of the percent of respondents mentioning, which means number 1, that's the one that most people mentioned. So in Revere, the top 5 health concerns include substance use and overdoses, mental health, environment, so this included things like flooding, air quality, heat, affordable housing, and poverty. These are all really big and intractable problems, so they're not something that can be looked at in public health alone, which is why it's so important to look at it, these public health initiatives, as part of a larger master planning process. So this master planning process is not the only thing that the city has, initiative that the city is currently running that looks at looks at public health. So Revere has already partnered with MAPC to look at pocket parks, which if you've already been by my colleague Heidi's boards, you might know a little bit about. They're small parks that focus on vacant or open city lands, and we're inviting you all to stop by this board and give us an idea of what you would like to see and what you would like to use these parks for. They've also partnered with nearby communities to do an integrated community health needs assessment, and that's being led by the North Suffolk Public Health Collaborative, and they're the author of that health survey that I've mentioned a couple of times already tonight. The City of Revere's Community Health Initiatives has also been working on several really important food access initiatives, which look specifically at access to healthy and affordable food. So as Courtney mentioned, we are going to be co-facilitating a conversation today that's going to bridge both public health and open space. We have goals specific to both, but going into that conversation, we just want you to be mulling over what is your vision for your Revere in the next 5, 10 years, and what are the steps that we can take today to help you realize that vision. And then just another plug on your way out of the space today, coming up to the focus group, hopefully the public health and open space one, to just drop some feedback on Heidi's boards. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Sasha, who will talk to you about energy and climate.
Thanks. So I'm Sasha, and I'm a clean energy and climate planner, and I'm going to be talking about energy and climate. First off, I just want to talk about why energy and climate in a master plan. So we have increasing choices and awareness around energy usage and costs for both the municipality as well as for residents and businesses, and this issue is becoming increasingly important. Also, efforts around energy efficiency and clean energy can help save money and reduce costs for the community. It can also help reduce air pollution and carbon pollution, increase energy resilience and independence. And as we heard earlier, planning and preparing for climate resilience is also increasingly critical as we continue to experience extreme weather events like coastal flooding, heat waves, and extreme storms. So a few of the things that we heard back in January at the kickoff from the community in this topic area is that there is a need for more open space, green space, and street trees. And so we've heard that as a theme across several issue areas. We also heard that some community members and neighborhoods are already experiencing flooding, and that community members were surprised at how much heat impacts the community, especially extreme heat and urban heat islands. There's also a desire to address waste and litter around the community and improve recycling programs, and also a need for tools that will help reduce carbon pollution and increase resilience. So I just wanted to share some high-level information, and in the breakouts I'll have more information both on the energy and climate side. In terms of energy use across the community, we see that electricity usage has actually stayed pretty stable over the past few years in the residential sector, but that in the commercial and industrial sector we see that increasing. However, we do see that natural gas, which is often used for heating, has been increasing across all sectors. And then on the climate change impact side, this map shows a couple of the impacts. And again, I have a blow-up poster of this upstairs, so you can take a closer look if you didn't get to see it at the kickoff. But the red area in here is actually what we call urban heat island impacts. And this is the top 5% highest hottest areas across our region. So we mapped this for actually our whole 101 communities in the region. And so much of Revere is impacted when there is a heat wave or high heat days. And then the blue area and also the yellow area along the beach are actually in current FEMA flood zones. So these are areas that will already experience flooding during storms and coastal events. And as we know, too, scientists predict that our region will become warmer, wetter, and experience more extreme storms in the future, and that by 2050, our average climate for the region will be more similar to that of Georgia's. So the city is already taking steps to address issues around energy and climate. As the mayor mentioned, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program was conducted by the city this year and included a lot of community engagement. The city has also run several tree initiatives, including Greening the Gateway Cities and Tree City USA, aimed at improving urban tree canopy. And that recently the City Council approved a ban on single-use plastic bags and launched a textile recycling program, and just last month hosted the Beautify Revere event. So in the breakouts coming up in just a few moments, our room is going to be talking about what initiatives the city can do to reduce energy usage and carbon pollution, both at the municipal level as well as for residents and businesses. And then also what initiatives could the city do to increase preparedness and resilience around the impacts of climate change. And then lastly, we would love to hear from you as well on other energy, climate, and environmental issues that are important to you and the community. And now I'm going to pass this over to Kasha to talk about transportation.
Thank you, Sasha. Hi, folks. My name is Kasha Hart. I'm with our transportation department. Quick show of hands. How many folks walked or biked here today? Awesome. That's great. Beautiful weather for it. How many people took the bus? A few folks. Okay. How many people drove or carpooled? Don't worry. We're talking about traffic today. Thank you all so much for coming out. I just wanted to focus on this map for a moment. So at the kickoff, we asked folks, where do you feel unsafe walking or biking in Revere? Those are the red dots. The green dots represent areas where people feel safe, they like walking or biking. As you can see, a lot of people like to spend time at the waterfront, near open space. Makes a lot of sense. That's why transportation is so important. It helps us not only get to where we want to go, but not only where we need to go, but also to where we want to go. Two main concerns that we heard at the kickoff event are pedestrian safety and traffic. With respect to pedestrian safety, there was a lot of concerns just in light of the 2 children who were tragically killed late last year. There's a lot of concerns about kids who are walking to school and trying to navigate through the very difficult traffic circles in the city. And again, traffic is a big concern, particularly during peak commuting hours, not just Revere residents, but also folks commuting between the North Shore and Boston. So I do want to focus on traffic for a moment, and a time during which a lot of people experience traffic is during their commute. So 53% of Revere residents work in either Revere or Boston, 2 communities that I would consider to be pretty well served by transit, at least in comparison to some of the other communities in our region. However, only 27% of Revere residents take public transit to work, while 67% drive. One reason for this may be that it just takes much longer to get anywhere on public transit in comparison to driving. So while we're stuck in traffic and it's frustrating, it still seems to be the quickest option for many folks. And I do want to make sure that I know in that public transit metric that includes buses. We've heard from a lot of people that the buses just don't work for your schedule, they're not reliable, there just needs to be some work done with the buses. So we heard you on that. Like with many of the other topic areas that we heard about today, the city's already embarking on a lot of great initiatives to help address some of the mobility challenges in Revere. The city is participating in the Complete Streets initiative, having recently passed a Complete Streets policy, and I know they're embarking on developing a prioritization plan, identifying potential improvements throughout the city. I know there's some question about potential traffic impacts associated with all the development happening both in the city and in neighboring communities. The city is working on many different traffic studies to help better understand what those impacts may be. And then finally, walkability, which is crucial in a dense city like Revere. There's a lot of efforts underway to make sure that walking is a safe and comfortable alternative mode of transportation. So just a couple of questions to start thinking about before we transition over to the breakout groups. Along the lines of Complete Streets again, I'm hoping folks can consider what kinds of pedestrian and cyclist improvements you'd like to see in the city, especially if there are particular streets or intersections that you have in mind. Taking a step back, if all services were available to you, how would you love to get around the city? Would you love to walk more but don't feel great about the sidewalks? Would you like to take the bus but it just doesn't work for your schedule? And then finally, what are some of your favorite or most frequent destinations in Revere that can be challenging to get to? Is it a pain to get to the grocery store? Is it tough to get to your friend's house? And any other destinations that you may have in mind. With that, we're almost ready to transition to breakout groups, but I am going to turn it over to Ralph to close things out. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening. My name is Ralph Wilmer. I'm a co-project manager with Betsy on this project, and we look forward to continuing our work on this. So, just to sort of wrap up, we want to emphasize that this is one of several ways in which we're seeking public input on this process. We have a fairly robust public process that we're undertaking as part of this planning process. As was mentioned, we've had a couple of big public forums before this one, but this isn't going to be the only opportunity for you to participate in the process. So, in addition to the public forums, we're going to seek input via social media, surveys. There will be one more forum at the end of the process where we will present the draft plan. During the summer, we're going to conduct interviews and focus groups to drill down into some of the issues and get your opinions on a variety of different issues, some of which will be identified tonight. We're going to reach out to various stakeholder groups as well, so just stay tuned for how you can continue to participate in the process. And along those lines, we want to remind you that there is a Next Stop Revere website. The address is on this slide. It's revere.org/nextstoprevere. And all of the information that's been presented thus far, including the information that we'll be doing, that we'll be presenting tonight, and the results of the breakout groups, and all of that information will be available for people to take a look at. It's a mobile-friendly website, so if you're stuck on the train or whatever and just pull out your phone, you can keep up to date on the Next Stop Revere process. So in terms of what we're doing the rest of the evening, we're going to break out into 3 different breakout rooms. They're all upstairs, so if you go out these doors and to your right there's a staircase, and at the top of the stairs there's the library where transportation will be. The room next to that is room 222, which is for open space and public health. And then the next room is 220, and that's energy and climate. So choose the topic that you want to participate in. There'll be discussion and exercises focusing on some of the key points that were addressed by my previous speakers. Then we're going to get back and debrief here in this room at around 7:30. We're going to have reports from each of those groups so you can hear what the other groups talked about. And then we'll close the meeting at around 8. The boards, all of the boards that you saw during the open house, you may have noticed that they disappeared slowly while we were doing the presentation. They are all upstairs in the various breakout rooms. So if you want to take another look at the boards, particularly for a breakout group that you weren't participating in, they'll be upstairs through the end of the meeting. So with that, we thank you again for coming, and we'd like you to gather your things and head up to the breakout group of your choice.
Transportation is inherently a regional issue, so that question is, or that goal rather, is really trying to get at modes that go beyond Revere. So that's going to be some of the bigger roadways, some public transit, so blue line and bus route improvements, some of the larger scale, longer term improvements. Anything else from folks? All right. I think if we want to start just with some general thoughts, what people think about these goals, do they resonate with you? Have we missed anything crucial?
And it's going to be awkward, but we'll pass the mic around.
Yes,
so.
sorry.
It's going to be a little awkward, so bear with us. So don't all speak at once. Okay, there we go.
Consider it like the talking stick.
Great, thank you.
Okay, one of the things that I'm concerned about is the first goal that's listed here, the local goal. And one of the main concerns is, since I do drive Broadway quite frequently, like other people, is the intersections and the crosswalks that are along Broadway, particularly during school hours, both in the early morning and the afternoon. I find that pedestrians are in danger. Sometimes the lights don't coordinate with the right turns and the signaling that's happening. And I also notice, particularly kids coming from the high school from the west side to go to the east side towards the school, they're not using the crosswalks. They're cutting in between cars, they're cutting in front of cars. Sometimes it's hard for a car to stop in the middle of the street because the kid pops out between 2 cars. Sometimes people who are on the street basically feel they have the complete right-of-way, which safety-wise they do, but I think it poses a danger for them. So I think that something to study that would be very helpful.
Great.
So that touches on a lot of different things. That's signal timing, that's safe roadway design, that's ensuring your crosswalks are aligned with pedestrian desire lines too. So great comment, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ira Novoselsky. I'm a city councilor down in the Shirley Ave area, and a lot of my kids go from Shirley Ave to the high school.
Yep.
And not only that group, but I noticed even the kids going to Revere Street, they don't use the sidewalks. They use this median strip on American Legion Highway. One of my recommendations for that, and a lot of these things that we deal with are MassDOT issues, not city issues. You know, the city has Broadway, they can do some work on the lighting and the light signalization, but the walking for the kids from the high school in Rumney Marsh is horrible. They cross the street in the middle of the highway. I know they try to make it so the cars are stopped at the lights at Bell Circle or Revere Street, but they still cross and walk on the median strip. One of my recommendations, if we could ever get the state to do it, is to widen that road and make a Jersey barrier center strip. So the kids can't walk on that. And the other option is to try and get an overpass, pedestrian overpass, from the west side to the east side of American Legion Highway. So those are some of the things that we thought there. I know there was some issues down on Revere Beach Parkway where the new construction is, where Shaw's was. But we know it's a DCR property, roadway, MassDOT roadway, and they don't want overpasses because it's a historical roadway and there's a lot of things we can't do down there. Locally, I know Vonnie and I and several of the other people did a walking path up in the Shirley Ave area, like they've done in Ward 6 and Ward 4, and we did one in Shirley Ave. And people are using it, you know, just to see the neighborhood. When they get to the top, they look at the beach. They can see the beautiful shot of the beach on the top of Franklin Ave, looking over to Nehant. But one of my biggest things is MassDOT. You know, I know they're doing Bell Circle now, they're repaving it, but the light signalization there is so poor. They actually produce gridlock with some of the way that the traffic is coming up from 16 down on Route 1A, you know, northbound. And something has to be done with those. You know, and I know that would, and it's only a synchronization of the lights. It's not even they just put all new lights in with cameras. So if they corrected those cycling sections, and I've spoken to them, I've had discussions with them, I've told them what really has to be done. You know, I've kind of moved myself into the transportation world, especially when we were talking about Suffolk Downs with the casinos before. And I'm just trying to get them to understand that, you know, it's more of a local issue, not a statewide issue on these particular state roadways. So.
Great, yeah. Tasha, do you want to say a note about jurisdiction of roads, just to our
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's a great point. We heard a lot about that earlier. We do have this map up here. I'm sorry if it's a little challenging to see. Feel free to come on up. Revere, the city, only has jurisdiction over the roadways that it owns. And so on this map, that is all of the roadways that are in this dark gray. As you can see, though, some of the major thoroughfares are owned by MassDOT and DCR. So that is going to be an ongoing challenge that we're hoping to begin addressing in the master planning process. I don't think we will solve it. If we do, that will be the best master plan ever. But these ongoing jurisdictional issues are a big challenge, and that's why one of these goals is to continue to partner with MassDOT and DCR on these major roadway projects.
So, Ari, would you say that that's one of your priorities, is coordinating with the other regional entities?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You know, DCR I get along pretty well with.
Yep.
If we need a pedestrian crosswalk stanchion, you know, on some of my crosswalks on Ocean Ave, DCR is very cooperative on that. MassDOT tries to be, but they always find the reason not to when I do talk to them. So we'll see what happens from there.
Great, okay, thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Yep. You can go first.
Okay.
We got plenty of time.
Yeah, I just want to bring up about school lottery system, transporting kids from one side of the city to other side of the city.
Okay.
That will cause a lot of traffic problems in the city.
So I really love the bus accessibility, and I really appreciate the local goals here, as well as the regional goals. One of my favorite local goal here is improving and expanding on the on and off street walking and biking infrastructure, because I live in a neighborhood that is extremely walkable and it's close by the beach, and it is changed in such a way that there is more visibility in terms of folks who are not just driving, and I appreciate that as a bus taker, rider. I would say that one of the things I'd like to see kind of incorporated here is how do we, one, navigate this tension between an organic path that maybe a demographic population uses. So when we're talking about our students, they're not crossing at crosswalks. Well, you know, I'm guilty for not crossing at crosswalks all the time, because if I'm running a little bit late, I am going to go to that medium that we would want to put a Jersey barrier there. Like, I need to get to this place, and so I'm not going to go to the crosswalk. Although at Bell Circle, I definitely respect crosswalks. So I think that it's really interesting. How do we navigate an organic path that, as an individual who might be just a student running to get to class, or an individual who's just trying to get to whatever the case may be, in terms of design, it's not necessarily a transportation goal, but more of a design goal. But it's a tension that kind of comes up when we talk about our local goals. And another piece that I want to also address and encourage when we think about transportation goals is that we are a gateway city. We have a lot of folks who whose language is not English, and while we encourage, you know, learning English as a second language, there are people who are just arriving, and they too need to navigate and know how to navigate. So the other tension in the transportation goal is how do you put wayfinding into the mix without like oversaturating your city with a ton of wayfinding signage. I don't know, and I'm a huge proponent of design supports that, but just being cautious of, we as a city have this diverse community, and some of us are new residents who may just not think about crossing the street and looking both ways. I know that in Cambodia, where my family's from, you are taking a chance from crossing from one side of the street to the other. There are no marked lanes, right? And so here I appreciate that. And so that's one respect. And I think about our older senior population in my neighborhood who are in wheelchairs, and I think about them in the wintertime. And how do we make our roadway adoptable or adaptable to those particular citizens? So that was a lot to share, but a lot that I've been carrying.
And just a note, I'm taking notes up here. We're going to ask one person to report back from the group at the 3 key points. So what we'll do shortly before we end is just go through all the points and get a sense of consensus around 3 major points.
We have Betsy taking notes and Ruben taking notes as well. So we're documenting all of this.
I'm Bob O'Brien. I live at 10 Ocean Avenue down by Elliott Circle. I also happen to be the Economic Development Director of Revere, but I'm not wearing that hat. Living on the beach, I take the Blue Line for granted. I walk all over the place along the waterfront. It's fabulous. My biking days are over, but I have the tremendous benefit of being close to those resources. But when I hear somebody say that only 27% of Revere uses public transit, part of it for me has to do with the interconnectivity of the modes of transportation. If you look at this map, for example, the Blue Line is on the eastern edge of Revere. Most of Revere is not easily accessible to the Blue Line. For those of us who live there, we use it all of the time. For those new developments that are being built, those people overwhelmingly use public transit. But there needs to be a better way to get to public transit, whether that's walking or biking, which is increasingly more popular with the bike share programs, or even better local bus connections to the Blue Line. Going from here to Boston on the roadway isn't much better in a bus than it is in a car, because it's the same congestion. But if you could get to the Blue Line, then you can get into town in 15 minutes. And I think interconnectivity is a big issue. Blue Line is a tremendous resource, but it's relatively isolated within the community, and I think we forget that. We need to overcome that. I would also mention one other thing, by the way. Suffolk Downs has been mentioned. We have a chance, if we want a truly intermodal community, to build such at Suffolk Downs, because that's being built from the ground up. They are starting with a blank slate. If we want them to do it right, we need to tell them what right is. They are ready to do that, but that's our opportunity to learn from our experience and do it right there as well as elsewhere in the community.
Hi, my name is Damon. There's two things I would like to say. One, heading north, so the southern part of Broadway Avenue in particular, it would be very nice to have a protected bike lane. It's well used. I'm on it very often, and I feel quite nervous at different points in time. And then especially in the downtown Broadway area, levels of traffic calming, expanding the sidewalks, hopefully getting rid of some sort of parking to expand the sidewalk, make it more walkable, more friendly for people to spend time there. Those are the points I have.
Thank you. Sure.
Just to add to what, just to add what you were saying, bike rider safety is a real issue with me because there's open bike lanes and sometimes they're very, very tightly set up along the city. If you've ever been to Amsterdam, they have a sidewalk, they have a bike lane, they have 3 or 4 foot barriers spread out. They don't have to be ugly looking, but it signifies to the drivers that there are definitely people on two-wheeled vehicles, and it certainly helps, prevent accidents, that's for sure. Sometimes you go around the city and all of a sudden the bike lane ends and then it picks up, and that's pretty damn dangerous.
I'm going to answer that comment and answer Bob's comment too about connectivity for bike lanes. So one of the things that we keep looking at when we talk about redoing bike lanes and putting bike lanes in the city is the existing parking that exists on our roadways, and that's really something that is going to take some significant planning and compromise on everybody's part to redesign Broadway or Revere Street so that you can have a designated bike lane where there's a little bit more protection and safety between the cars and the vehicles. And to Bob's point about the interconnectivity from the Blue Line from the west side of the city to the east, I think one of the regional goals should definitely be, and like to Steve's point, you have a bike lane and then it ends. Well, making sure that that bike lane, for example, if we have a bike lane on Revere Street, it carries on all the way down Ocean Ave and gets you to the transit. If we put a bike lane on Central Ave or Beach Street, where there's something through Bell Circle or down Winthrop Parkway to get you to transit. And that's something that's a regional goal of mine that I would like to see, is that connectivity and the cooperation between us and MassDOT or DCR, and not have it take 5, 10, 15 years, but have it be something that we say, look, we have a need, we have data, this is what's happening, let's see if we can make sure that we can continue our bike lane onto your road.
Great. Thank you, Julie. And I'll say that's certainly a trend that we're seeing in other cities too, across the region. So that connectivity is crucial to making sure the utility of all of our bike infrastructure, our walking infrastructure is there. But I'm really glad that this came up, thinking about how we allocate our roadway space. We haven't talked at all about Uber and Lyft and delivery vehicles and all of the other competition for our roadway space. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. It's an issue that all communities are really grappling with right now. 4 minutes left. Okay, anyone who has not spoken yet and has something that they want to say. Great.
David Gregory, I live in Beachmont. We're talking about specialized infrastructure like protected bike lanes and so on, and I do agree with all that's said about them being desirable and helpful and safe. The risk is when it becomes such a palaver to build anything at all, time spent in discussion and cost and delays, we get much less in the end. So we have to balance the need to have something versus a perfect solution.
I recently learned the phrase "a half a loaf is better than no loaf at all." I think that applies there. Yep.
I would just say one thing with regard to parking as it relates to use of the space and bike lanes and so forth. One of the local goals, the last one here, is consider modifying parking regulations. We are way behind in on-street parking regulations, whether it has to do with residential parking or whatever. But they identified 3 areas here, the downtown, on the waterfront, and in residential neighborhoods. And I just want to emphasize how different each of those communities is. We also need to consider the possibility of managed parking. I live on Ocean Avenue, which functions like a highway. But at night, on the weekends, during holidays, I never feel more at home than when the Sandcastles is in, because they park on that roadway. It feels more like a street to me. We need to consider the possibility of managed parking, so the roadway is available for travel during peak periods, but it's returned to local use for off-peak periods. We need to get more creative about our on-street parking regulations and understand it's different on the waterfront than in West Revere or in downtown. And frequently the patrons are different. In the waterfront, most of the patrons are regional patrons. They, for the most part, don't even live in Revere. In the western part of Revere, they're almost all residents. Downtown, it's a mix of both. And we need to adapt our regulations to the changing environment within the community.
One or two more comments?
Yeah, if I may, one thing that hasn't been mentioned on the T is the commuter line.
Yes.
We have a commuter line that comes down from the North Shore, and that's one thing that more people could utilize if there was a stop in Revere. And we've already been talking about it. We've had T-bills authorized by the state to do a commuter rail station at Wonderland site and the Necco site, and then do a pedestrian movement overhead over to the Blue Line, which is another connection that could possibly reduce the number of vehicles that come into and through Revere. So I know that's, it's on constant negotiations and talk about it, and hopefully when we do develop Wonderland, that this commuter rail station will become a reality.
Great.
Thank you. One more?
And then I'll read through what we discussed.
Speak the baton.
I thought I saw you lift your hand.
So which point do I do? I moved here 2 years ago. I didn't have a car until I moved here. And I know this isn't a Revere problem, it's a regional problem, and I don't know what we can do, but if there's anything while we're planning this that we can do about the culture of aggressive driving, because it's something that I've noticed to the point that, I live less than a mile from the beach. This is like a dream to live that near the beach. And sometimes I'll be thinking, oh, it'd be great to go to the beach, but I actually consider how angry I'm going to get on the way there. So personally for me, it's unsafe. It's, watching people be honked at aggressively, for trying to be safe. I've seen people being reasonably cautious, trying to merge into Bell Circle going east, that terrible merge there, and have people just laying on their horn behind them, trying to push them into, traffic that's going right in front of them. So I don't know what we can do. It may be unrealistic, but if there's traffic calming, if there's just a culture shift, enforcement, although I know there's, other things that need to be enforced besides, people driving aggressively, but.
Those aren't Revere residents, those are.
Exactly. No, I know it's not a Revere problem, just something I personally noticed after having moved here. I did not have a car beforehand, but no, it's definitely a regional problem. We're famous for that.
That's one more point, yeah.
Yes. One more point.
All right. Thank you. It's a great point. Something I take as a given, but.
How about adding parking meters by the beach, by DCR, so to discourage people driving to the beach?
Okay, I'm writing that down.
I would add to that the possibility not just of discouraging that, but using those revenues to maintain the beach.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you all for your points and your comments today. I think, Betsy, do you want to do
Yeah,
a
we'll
quick,
do a quick recap.
quick recap?
And then we're going to ask someone to report back to the group, one of the steering committee members, so we'll put you on the spot to ask you to report back to the group. One of the key pieces of feedback that we heard from the last forum is that there's way too many discussions happening, so people wanted to hear what people were talking about in the other room. So that's the goal of bringing everyone back downstairs so that you can hear what was talked about in the other groups. So it sounds like there's kind of a few key themes. One I heard was around safety. So that's prioritizing safety both for drivers, but then particularly for those who are walking and biking. So I heard that as a key theme. We talked a little bit about about coordinating with MassDOT and DCR. That certainly sounds like a priority. That's more a long-term goal. We know it takes a long time and there's progress that's been made, but that sounds like that's a key priority of the group. We also heard about so again, regional collaboration. We heard about accessibility with the MBTA as well as the commuter rail. So that sounds like that's another goal, is working with the MBTA for bus access across the city, but then also for the commuter rail. This also talks again about biking and walkability and pedestrian access. And then there was comments around wayfinding signage and how do we particularly improve services for users of other languages. And then thinking about traffic created by new developments, which is one of the other goals there. Traffic calming measures, bike safety. We heard about parking regulations. And then, one of the ideas of how do we change people's behavior with parking meters and other ways to change behavior. So it sounds like we have a few key points. What we're going to do is summarize those and then ask someone from the steering committee to report back.
I would take just one exception.
Yes.
Better partnership with DCR and DOT has been a long-term goal for too long.
Okay.
It has to be a short-term goal.
Okay, I will. Do you want us to change it? We'll change that on the. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So we would invite you to go back downstairs. I know it's tempting to go outside. If you would just stay with us for 20 more minutes, because you'll get to hear what the other groups have talked about, which certainly influences this group as well. So we're going to start with energy and climate. And what we've done is we've asked members of the steering committee to give 3 points, and we're going to be tight on, and I'm looking at you, members of the steering committee who are reporting back. 3 key takeaways from your discussion. Okay. So I'm going to invite Ed DeVoe to come up, and Ed will share 3 key points about the energy and climate discussion. Sure.
So for our project this year, the 3 things that we came up with were, the first one was ensuring the protection of infrastructure, light poles and things that keep the electricity going, making sure that utility boxes and things like that aren't in areas they're susceptible to being under 6 feet of water and blowing out and then knocking out a whole neighborhood. That was one thing. The other thing was the establishment of green and gray structure, walls, berms, natural berms and things like that to mitigate the impact of the rising tides and the climate changes. That was the second one. The third one was creating, we had a lot of discussion about clean energy and trying to get away from fossil fuels and how best to do that. There was a lot of discussion about how complicated it is to understand the field of salespeople that are out there selling solar panels and the programs that exist. And so we said there needs to be a better program for educating residents and people as to, what are the possibilities and the things available so you're not getting bamboozled, but more importantly, to help people make right choices. So if we can help people understand it better in fairly simple terms that they can negotiate the field with these salespeople and understand what choices they have, then they're more apt to be involved with adding solar energies and things like that to get away from fossil fuel. So those were the 3 basic things. Anybody from the group that's here, did I miss anything? You're facilitating, did I do all right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're still waiting for our public health and open space group, so I hope they come back. So let's turn it over to the transportation discussion group, and Stephen Fielding, who's on the steering committee, will give 3 key points of feedback.
Hi, I'm representing the transportation breakout session, and we focused on 3 key points in transportation. One is safety, specifically pedestrian. Secondly, bike rider safety. And thirdly, traffic safety. And that encompasses anything from the actual car driver themselves or the pedestrian that's involved in walking along the sidewalks and or the streets in Revere. The second point that we talked about was regional collaboration. And we felt that there were some really short-term goals in trying to bring MassDOT, DCR, and the city of Revere together. And that was most important. We've been talking about this for a long time. Now is the time to stop talking. And the other agency, thank you, Bob. So Bob O'Brien, that was a great comment you had at the meeting. The other regional collaboration would be between the City of Revere and the MBTA. Okay, and I assume that includes the commuter rail portion of the MBTA. And the third point in the transportation breakout sessions was parking management throughout the city, specifically the waterfront and along the beach, and trying to control the parking and identifying key times in which that can be enforced, and trying to make that more of a realistic neighborhood during off-peak hours. And that's basically the transportation breakout session points.
And thank you to the steering committee members who allowed us to put them on the spot tonight. And finally, we have Charlie Jafrida from the Rec Department, who's going to report back on open space and public health.
Thank you, Betsy. We had a really vibrant discussion. Thank you all for taking part in it. Some really incredible feedback. One of the best points that was made, I think we sort of collected, it was sort of manifested in different points. But it was sort of the city's in need of a one-stop communication hub of all of our community resources, our community partners, our recreation programs, our special events, and that one-stop hub needs to be supported through language help and also through ambassadors. And so the city has a tremendous amount of resources. And what we need to do is consolidate those resources into a website or a community center for residents to connect with those resources, and then take the residents and get them that information. So that was something that came up in our discussion. Another point was our outdoor fields needs improvement. Some of our soccer fields are in a little tough shape, and that we also potentially need more dedicated fields to soccer specifically. Sort of my institutional knowledge is the city could use some U8 or U10 fields. That people didn't use that language specifically, but that was sort of what they were hinting at. And then another major point was an increase of urban farms and community farming, which was a major discussion in there, and a lot of passionate discussion too. But food equity, food scarcity, and just allowing people to connect better with nature. So that was a really nice program. So, but it was a good talk. Thank you all for the feedback. We really do appreciate it.
So those were the 3 key points from each discussion group, but each discussion had a note taker who was furiously taking notes on a computer or writing them down. So everything that was said will be documented. And also, if you filled out one of the goals sheets, our team is going to be analyzing everything that people said. And so in the same way that we presented the goals that were discussed at the last forum, we'll do that back to the steering committee, back to the city, and on the city website, so you'll be able to see how things stacked up, and then how your feelings are being expressed in this master plan process. So thank you again for coming tonight. We do encourage folks to stay, to look at the boards. If you haven't put stickers up on those interactive boards over there, we really recommend that you go over and do it. It's fun, and also you can help us really understand what your priorities are. Again, please check out the city website. We'll have more opportunities for you to provide feedback through an upcoming survey. And please tell your neighbors and your friends about this process so they can participate too. Thank you to the city. Thank you to the Hill School. And finally, we would love to get your feedback on this event to see what we could do better next time. So there are evaluation forms that have been handed out to you, or you can grab them right before you leave. Please fill that out. Thank you.